really doesn't matter to me whether I do it for a living or not, because if I'm creative in life, my creativity will seep in and infect my work. And, the real problem, I think, is when you forget how to be creative, because it's not necessarily a God-given talent. It's also a skill and a muscle that you have to continue to exercise.
In this episode of the Creative Debrief, we're going to sit down with Mark Gillespie, who is the Director of Content at Forbes Books, and we're going to talk a little bit about his views on AI and how we can use them as creatives. And he'll also share with us how he leads his virtual team of copywriters successfully. All right, well, we are here today with Mark Gillespie. Mark, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Well, I am the Director of Content at Forbes Books, which is an imprint of Advantage Media Group, a business publishing company from Charleston, South Carolina. I work remotely from Rochester, New York, and I've had lots of different kinds of experiences in content production, publication planning, curriculum writing, you name it. I was a community journalist and public radio reporter for about 15 years. I've done it all, and I'm here to maybe try to help share a little bit of my experience and look forward to, the future of this kind of work and how we complement people. And oh, by the way, Emily and I worked together at a healthcare marketing agency and had a lot of fun coming up with things to delight and serve our clients' needs.
Yes, and it was awesome. Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and start out? Why don't you tell us about, we'll just like right out of the gate start talking about challenges and struggles. What is one of the biggest challenges that you've faced throughout your career?
Yeah, I wouldn't say throughout my career, but since journalism. Journalism has a strong focus on integrity, about telling the truth about what you see, about being accurate about things, and not being beholden to powerful stakeholders. So it's important that a journalist's perspective is respected, not only by the people they work for, but also by the people who read their stories. And so integrity is the most important thing. Since journalism, integrity is not the most important thing. The most important thing is whatever the stakeholders want. And that has been a little bit of a challenge because sometimes there are indeed better ways to go about approaching a project, but it's not the one that you have to use. And so I find that I'm always looking for small opportunities to exercise integrity, to make sure that the content quality is high and free of errors and consistent across the board, and also to build trust with stakeholders so that they understand that my sense of integrity serves them. But it's not consistent the way it was before. It's something that always is kind of on the front of my mind.
So I think what you're saying is that you're taking a different approach to your work. So maybe like a different mindset to what you're doing. And it's necessary to shift that just based on the difference in the type of business that you're working with.
Exactly. I mean, when you're working in content marketing, as opposed to journalism, what you're trying to communicate is whatever the client wants you to communicate. Whereas in community journalism, you might be sitting at that hospital or that business or so forth and taking a good hard look at them and not necessarily reporting things that they want you to say. And so there's a little bit of a shift where, you've got to do fact checking. You've got to make sure that things are accurate and complete, and you need to be able to push back when they want you to say something that's false. At Forbes Books, it's like, oh, we've got to check this out and see how this is. And that's an area of integrity that we take very seriously, is that we check all financial claims. But I think all the way across the board, if you work for a company that just takes things at face value and doesn't do its homework, that you should do a little soul searching.
So we have talked about this offline quite a bit about how, and I'm totally shifting gears on you here, but we've talked a little bit about how your experience with COVID was a little bit different from everybody else's because you already worked remotely. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I lost a job right before COVID, working as director of communications at a community college. And then the very next job I got was as a curriculum writer for an online university. And then COVID didn't really lock us down for about 6 more months. So I was already set up with a home office, with a remote crew that was scattered all the way across the country, and was already in that routine. And then the very next place I started working was the place that you and I worked together, which was a healthcare marketing agency that was also remotely distributed. And I think that right after COVID, they shut down their big, beautiful 60,000 square foot home office and rented a 2,000 square foot executive office and storage room. And that became their headquarters where they received their mail. And so it's become kind of the norm for a lot of creative companies to just provide computers and internet access to the creators and then let them live wherever they want. That the upside of that is that you have incredible work-life balance, and you can find times to, you know, work when you're most creative, middle of the night, get the job done, when the juices are flowing, and not worry so much about putting in face time at the office. But the downside of that is sometimes it's difficult to see yourself as part of a team pulling together. You tend to receive all of your work as, items on a to-do list, and then you crank it out, and there doesn't necessarily seem to be that satisfaction of finishing. And so, if you're a leader of creative teams like I am, that's always the struggle, is how do you define when something is done, and how do you try to give people a sense of satisfaction that they would be experiencing naturally if they worked in the office.
What do you use to help them feel like they're accomplishing things?
Well, we have one-on-one meetings every week, and I try to notice something that they've done well and just lavish praise. It's like, I noticed the way that you handled yourself in that member, or we call them members, client meeting today, and I just want to say that you handled that like a boss, and I'm very impressed with you. And then I also ask my employees to, or my direct reports to send me the piece of work they're most proud of in any given week. And then we go through and I do appreciative editing. So I go in and I tell them all the things they did right. Because, I'm usually tearing it apart. I'm usually saying, we need to fix this. This headline's too short. You need to include some key phrases in the lead paragraph. Your CTA is not strong enough. We're always trying to improve stuff, but there should be a time when you can do appreciative editing and you just say, okay, I just want to talk about the strengths and not worry about the weaknesses.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. And maybe it's because my background is not in copywriting or editing, but I just would love to steal that for design feedback. I think it's great. I think that's a really nice way to bolster confidence and increase morale. And tell me, how do you keep your team connected? You said that, well, you mentioned that, that's one of the challenges of remote work. What are the things that you do to help keep your teams connected?
And I don't know that I'm doing it 100% well. I mean, it's just part of the challenge. It's
Mhm.
not a perfect system. So one of the things that we do is we have a morning huddle. It's part of the rituals of our company. So I see my team face to face once a day for 15 minutes. And we check in, we talk about, the hurdles that we're facing. We go around the room and we discuss things. And then what I do is we have one meeting a week where we don't talk about work, where instead we talk about writing in general and creativity and what inspires us. And we did this thing like, what's on your desk? And I went around and I held up, well, I have this coffee mug from Juan Valdez that my mother-in-law brought me from Colombia. Or, I have this button from the Jello Museum, which is nearby. And so it's just fun to have those kinds of conversations and try to get to know people as human beings and not just as, names on a digital task system that can do things for you. So, it's always fun to do that. And, when I was sort of a frontline employee, I also tried to reach out and make the best sometimes of bad situations, to have all the cross chatter that was going on during meetings that were challenging, to have times. I remember at the agency where we worked, we had a science fiction book club that would meet, once a month and discuss things that we geeked out over, and certainly had nothing to do with work. And I think that employers that make time for people to be human beings Those are the green flags you should be looking for when you're looking for work.
Yes, that's fantastic. I completely agree. And I think what you said about, gosh, I've lost my train of thought. But I guess what you're talking about is connectivity, and you're like, oh, it's still a challenge for you, right? These are the things you're doing. You're not 100% there yet, but I think that's what we're finding where more and more people are working remotely is that we haven't figured out a way to solve the problem of remote work completely, just like we haven't found a way to solve the problem of in-person work as well. On-site work still has the issues of work-life balance, people having trouble with their commutes, or people wanting to have kids but it's too far away from the daycare or something like that. There's just a whole slew of challenges. And so anyway, it sounds like you have a lot of great things that you're working on, and I think that that's really exciting. And I love any time that we can bring ideas to the table for how to solve the problem of remote work, because if we can figure out the connectivity piece a little bit more, which nothing replaces human reaction, I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there.
Yeah.
Real in-person human reaction, but ways that we can help mitigate that, I think, are just awesome. And the more we work this way, I think the more we'll discover ways to figure it out. Anyway, yeah, that was wonderful.
Oh, yeah. I've got to say, too, that remote work offers something that's closer to a true meritocracy. I think that people are being valued for the quality of work that they do, and not necessarily based on, who has the closest desks to the boss's office. I mean, I remember working at a newspaper once, and every year around the publisher's birthday, this employee would just sort of spontaneously take a collection up to send the publisher and his wife off to a resort weekend. And it's like, I didn't get resort weekends as bonuses, but that person used that as an opportunity to raise their profile. And I don't think that those kinds of things work as well in remote environments. And I think that it puts everybody kind of on a more even footing, especially if you have social anxiety issues.
Mhm.
You do excellent work, but you don't necessarily function well, when you have to compete for attention inside a live office.
Yeah, completely agree. And so I talk about it in terms of it's leveling the playing field for everybody, whether you're all in house or you're all remote. I think there's equality in both. When you're hybrid is when it gets even trickier,
Hmm.
right? And I think that was the challenge that you and I had when we worked together, the business had, is that some people were remote and some people weren't. And they were both like mostly full-time instances of each. And I noticed when we all went remote, it was a game changer for everybody, and it was a game changer for the business. And I just think that it's a really interesting thing that we're exploring right now. Um, and
But I
so,
felt it, and I should say that part of the company culture that you guys had, and we were lucky because I worked there with you during COVID, and
Mhm.
there was this legitimate reason to stay home and not interact with each other. But I would imagine that the remote workers at that company have a harder time than the people who live in the city where the company is based, right? So you can still get together for lunch in a restaurant. You can still have social occasions. You can still have those opportunities to kind of see people face to face, even go down to a library and check out a conference room or a co working space and work on a project together. And so, I think that companies that value remote work ought to insist on it and make sure that everybody has equal opportunity to contribute, no matter where they live.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's really cool. And then something that you said about your team specifically just made me think about burnout. And as a leader, okay, so I want to talk about it from your perspective and maybe from like your employees' perspective. As a leader, how do you prevent burnout, and how do you help nurture a team that doesn't have burnout, or how do you help them avoid burnout?
Well, I think that burnout is caused by every day seeming like it's the same as the day before. Like you're not getting ahead. Like you get up, you've got the same type of tasks in your inbox. You just have to get them done. There's no reward whether you do it well or not. As long as you get it done on time and check that box, it's okay. And that sort of grinding sameness is what leads to burnout. And so I think it's important. to provide kind of long-term achievements that we all work together as a team. And so once we reach that plateau, we're at a higher level, and then we try to reach for the next one, or to have projects that you're personally in charge of. So, I use those two things. For one thing, my team is trying to work toward a 3-course certificate program in AI prompt engineering. And so it's not just something I'm doing for myself. We're working on it together at the same pace and applying the lessons to our daily work. And so, by October or November, we're all going to be certified prompt engineers from Vanderbilt University, which is
Fantastic.
awesome,
Yeah.
right? And then by the same token, I'm looking for places where, I have a content manager who has for a long time participated in putting together a book review magazine that my company publishes. And so I went to him last week in our one-on-one. I said, okay, you are now in charge of that project. I take direction from you. And so all of a sudden you've got this sort of, and he's handling it well. Like, it's just, he knows everything about it. It's just that now he has the responsibility to execute. And I said, I'm going to, anytime somebody asks a question about this, I'm going to ask you for the answer. I'm not going to answer myself. And we're going to get everybody in this company used to treating you like you're in charge. And, I think that finding those sorts of pocket of autonomy is so important in helping to prevent burnout.
Absolutely. And I think you're putting all of the power or control in his hands, and I'm
Yeah,
sure their hands, and I'm sure it helps them feel so much more energetic about the project and so much more excited.
exactly. It's like everybody on your team should own 3 things. And you go to them as a leader and you ask their advice and you say, okay, what do you think? Are you having any obstacles to getting this done on time? How can I help you? Tell me how I can serve you. And I think that also helps me, you know, kind of avoid burnout as an individual contributor, because what's happening is I'm having to monitor that and be the supervisor, but I'm also having to support it as a contributor, as a producer. And it's a lot of fun to be able to slip into those different roles. We forget at work that our job title isn't our role, that we can play many different roles, and it's possible to kind of shift and learn how to do different things and keep things excited.
Right, exactly. Do you find that whenever you're, I guess, delegating this type of work to somebody with complete autonomy, and you're like, okay, you're the expert. This is your project. You're my boss now with this. Do you ever find that if you have maybe like an outside stakeholder or somebody, do you ever get feedback from them that affects your employees' ability to have that type of autonomy? And if so,
Oh,
what do you?
I'm sure it will happen, and I think it's just important to be clear. I mean, certainly if you're the publisher of a magazine and you've hired somebody to be the editor of the magazine and make all content decisions, you can go to the meeting, but you have to be very clear with the stakeholders that you're not making that decision. You've got to be willing to kick it over and say, okay, I want to hear from my editor before I answer. So it's just very important that you respect people's opinions as much as possible. And I learned that because I got to be involved on a TV production once, and we were working on a pilot for a program, and I'm friends with the executive producer, and he hired a director to come in. And I was saying, why don't you ask the director to do this? And I said, no, I don't ask the director to do anything. So this is the director's vision. This is the director's program. If I do that, we will have a conflict and he will quit. I went, oh, okay. And so, I just learned that when you ask somebody to take a creative role, you have to respect their autonomy and their wisdom to get the job done the way that they see it done. And that gets back to our first question about integrity. Like, if you give somebody autonomy, you're also asking them to exercise their own integrity, which is very powerful.
What tools have you developed that help create alignment and say like what the creative vision is for the project? Like, do you have a creative brief or something like that that outlines expectations in advance so you can ensure they have everything that they need to operate independently? What do you do for that?
Well, I have, because we work mostly with copywriting. And so I do an assignment brief where everything that the writer needs to know and all the resources that they're going to use are either described or linked in that one document. And so when a writer that I work with receives an assignment brief, it's literally an instruction set with a database attached to it that they can use to begin work. Anytime that a creative professional has to spend time, searching for resources, asking questions, um, going back through their own files to find that document that they need, that's wasted time. And especially when you're paying people by the word, if you're not organized in the way that you're assigning things, they're not able to max out what they can earn. And so I feel like it's incumbent to make sure that writers are able to begin from the get-go with the packet that you send them. Then by the same token, I'm a huge believer in recording calls and creating transcripts using, the AI tools that Google Meet and Zoom and everything have built into them, because then I can like interrogate the transcript. I can work up creative briefs based on what the client actually asked for. I can go in and I can also, using AI tools, understand what the client meant when things were ambiguous. I can say, okay, what are the top 5 goals for this project based on this interview? Or can you tell me the 10 topics this person cares most about based on what they said? And so you can work up these lists that lead to SEO research, that lead to creating content outlines, topic brainstorming, you name it. So I just try to collect as much machine text as I possibly can from every interaction that I have with a client.
So, since we brought up AI, I think this is a good time to ask you the big AI question. What's your philosophy around AI and how it affects you professionally and how you see it affecting your team and the businesses that you work with?
Well, and I work at a company where use of AI is very sensitive because, first and foremost, we're a ghostwriting company. We create product that somebody else signs their name to. And usually that somebody else is a public figure who's reaching for a higher level of esteem and authority in the world. And so it's very important that if somebody is putting their name at the top of a piece of content, that the content sounds like they said it. Now, sometimes, we can get pretty close through AI content generation because we have a book that they've written or a whole bunch of other content that they've written that we can model on. But at the end of it, you've got to read every word of what you generate and make sure it rings true and make sure that you change things that sound overly wordy or overly formal or doesn't sound like something that person would have said or written. At the end of the day, our number one stakeholder is the client, and it's got to pass muster with them. Okay, well, that's content generation. Everything that happens before content generation is fair game. It really doesn't matter whether an AI wrote your outline or not for a blog. It really doesn't matter whether you did a keyword search of a manuscript or whether you had AI go through and identify, all the times that an author mentioned food in a book. AI is very good at helping you brainstorm, develop ideas, get yourself organized, and create entire document templates that can support your writing before you even begin. There is a promise in AI to kind of speed things up and create more volume. But you have to be, like I said, very careful because the kind of work that you're doing has to be, piercingly effective. And if it's not, then you're leaning on AI as a crutch rather than a tool.
Hmm.
Um,
I think that,
yeah.
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying we could go on and on. I love AI. I love everything that ChatGPT can do, and it can do some things that are just kind of astounding. And I would say if you are a young creative professional, you need to learn everything you can about how to use these tools and understand how to let it take the load off of you for all the things about your work that suck, that you don't want to do, that's not fun. Handwritten notes, stop. Don't do handwritten notes anymore. Just record the call, let it transcribe it, and then ask it questions. And you'll be very surprised how it can inform your decisions.
Exactly. Using it as a tool, I think, or like an assistant almost, and less like
Yeah.
this like magical solution that's going to increase the amount of time. Like I saw something the other day. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place right now, but I
Oh
saw
no,
something
it's all right.
that said that AI is cool because it's going to free you up the time to do more things that you want to be doing. And for us, I think that would be using our creative skills more because right now, I don't think can effectively do what we're doing. I'm not saying it'll never be able to do that, but we can really lean on it to kind of get rid of all the boring stuff that we don't want to do or we don't want to be wasting our time with and use it as more of a tool to just, yeah, give us more freedom in our creativity.
So let's say I give you a zip file that has 4,000 images in it, and they're in all kinds of different file formats, and some of them are big images, some of them are small images, and they're not all images of things you need for your process. So let's say now you're taking those 4,000 images and you're creating a website for a horse farm. And so what ChatGPT can do for you is say, please look at every image in this file, convert them all to JPEGs 1,500 pixels wide, and separate the ones that would work for a horse farm website into one folder and all the extra stuff into another folder. And then you hit the prompt and you go have a cup of coffee. And when you come back to your computer, it's done.
Exactly.
And how many times as a designer have you had to spend an entire afternoon or an entire day doing work that sucks and is not creative?
Exactly. I think that's a great metaphor for what we're talking about. I love it. Um, is there anything else you would like to share about your thoughts or your visions for the future, anything around AI?
Well, I just think that it's going to keep getting better. I heard somebody describe it as a virtual dumbass, which was amazing. I don't have that opinion of it. It's not a virtual dumbass. It's and excuse my language for those under 18 who are listening at home. No, it's an inexperienced intern is what it is, and you have to tell it exactly what it needs to do. I heard a better metaphor for it. It's an alien chef. So you've just hired a little alien whose mind is completely different from yours, and all of human food is poisonous to it. And you're telling it to make you dinner, and you're giving it all the ingredients it needs, and you're giving it a cookbook, and you say, "I want spaghetti and meatballs for dinner." And so it has the meat, the onions, the garlic, everything over here. It's got the instructions. But if it tastes the food to see if it's any good, it will die. And so you have an intelligent being who's preparing things for you, but has no idea how you're going to experience it or how you're going to react to it. And it's just always important to understand that AI is doing its very best. It's not a flawed tool. The flaw is that we haven't given it specific and clear enough instructions. And that's the real struggle is it can't read our minds yet and maybe never will.
I think it's kind of like in its infancy stage still. You know, you have to grow and nurture it, and there are people growing and nurturing AI, and I think we have to be patient for that and for its maturity. And I think also it's up to us to figure out how to use it. I mean, we're in this really interesting time where the world is our oyster a little bit. We can think of all the different ways that we could use AI, and we're ready for it, right? By the time it gets there. But I
Yeah.
was curious whenever, let's see, you were talking about, this is like going way back to the start of the conversation, but you were talking about integrity and working as a journalist versus working within a business. And I was curious because there's like a tension there, sort of related to that tension. How do you balance business goals with the need to express yourself creatively? And that can either go for you or say like your team, because I think it's very important that we understand like how we help others do that as well.
And I think that, I mean, that's a good point. We don't always get to do that. I mean, you always have to use that magazine template, or you always have to kind of fill in the blanks on that press release. The kind of work that you tend to do in agencies tends to be highly templated. And you're lucky if you have the opportunity to put your personal stamp on it. And some creative people who work in agencies are privileged to be treated like an artist, but not everybody is. So I think if creative outlets and creative expression is important to you, that you need to find it someplace else, to have some ability to go and do some work. Freelance writing is a great way to do that because you get to pick and choose where you go. I write food reviews sometimes for a local magazine because I get to go into a restaurant, I get to kind of observe and experience something and then figure out how to express that in a way that is enticing to a readership. And that helps me, if I've had to sit down and write web copy for 3 different websites and it all has to be boilerplate, sound the same. It's nice to have a time in the week where I can just sort of go, this is mine. And they're buying that work from me because I have a particular point of view, not just because I know how to put together food reviews, using the building blocks of other magazines.
I would think that would be very self-affirming, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Volunteer, do anything you can. Just have a second thing that gives you joy if the first thing isn't.
I think that starting out just from a designer's perspective, starting out in our careers, we're encouraged to be creative, and I guess it depends on your background or where you went to school or whatever, but you're encouraged to be creative, and then it's like a shock to the system to learn that you can't just do whatever you want. And so I think that it's this lifelong journey of figuring out, how do you take care of yourself as a creative person who has that need for the outlet, versus how do you do what you're really supposed to do, which is meet your clients' goals, right? And I don't think there's anything bad about that. I think there are a lot of people who get a lot of joy out of providing their clients with exactly what they need and seeing their clients succeed. I think sometimes you can get lost in always serving others, and it kind of falls into the category of you need to take care of yourself too. So, but yeah, I think that's great. And another question for you. Oh, actually, let me ask you this one. How do you nurture your own creativity outside of what we just talked about?
Well, I think that my creative juices get going when I have to work on a project and I don't understand exactly what I need to do to get from A to Z, where it becomes more like hiking on an unfamiliar trail. And so I'm always looking for those kinds of opportunities, whether it's I go to a restaurant sometimes, I'm a big foodie, and I'll have a meal that I really enjoy, and I have to say, okay, how do I make this at home? Like, how can I deconstruct this experience and recreate it for myself? And getting there is a lot of fun. It doesn't always work. I'm not a trained chef. I don't have much experience cooking, but I try to get there with it. Or I try to challenge myself to be funny on social media, to be the guy that people laugh at. I try to engage in conversations that are just deeply weird and geeky as much as I can. So you have to find those opportunities and also the like-minded people to associate yourself with so that you feel at home someplace. And that's what kind of feeds my creativity. It really doesn't matter to me whether I do it for a living or not, because if I'm creative in life, my creativity will seep in and infect my work. And the real problem, I think, is when you forget how to be creative, because it's not necessarily a God-given talent. It's also a skill and a muscle that you have to continue to exercise.
So, what advice would you give to young copywriters just starting out, or established copywriters that are currently struggling?
Well, my advice is to develop a wide range of different skills. Is try your best to work on a project, to learn everything you can about it, and then figure out how you can start working on something else. Because I think that one of the most attractive things a hiring manager is going to be looking for somebody who has 3 or 4 years of experience is how many different things can you do? Like how many different directions can you go? And I found, over the years, as I've applied for different kinds of jobs and different levels of jobs, that that's been the thing that benefits me most is I can go in about 5 or 6 different directions anytime I do a job search. So I would say just avoid being pigeonholed and keep your mind open and look for every opportunity you can to stretch.
That's great. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being here today and sitting down and chatting with me about creative things, specifically related to copywriting, editing, book writing, and all that good stuff. It's been really fun. Thank you again.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. It's been a pleasure, and I hope some people can benefit from this conversation.
Awesome. They will.